Manufacturing Matters is an MFG Radio Network production brought to you by GIE Media's Manufacturing Group as industry experts take deep dives into the latest manufacturing matters, whether it's new innovations, products, technologies, and emerging markets that help you understand better why manufacturing matters to you and also to the top companies in the medical, aerospace, defense, and electric vehicle manufacturing industries.
Welcome to Aerospace Industry 2024 Outlook Fall, presented by Richard Aboulafia, brought to you by Aerospace Manufacturing and Design magazine. I'm Eric Brothers, editor for the magazine. Aviation industry expert Richard Aboulafia will examine current aerospace markets and what to expect as aerospace firms report their third quarter results. Of particular focus, where are aerospace original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs, with their production rate plans? What adjustments are the OEMs making as we look to 2025? How has the economy affected forecasts for this year and next? And Boeing. Our presenter, Richard Aboulafia, Fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society, is Managing Director, Aerodynamic Advisory, Ann Arbor, Michigan. As many of you know already, Mr. Aboulafia is widely respected as an aviation industry expert and contributor to Aerospace Manufacturing and Design's annual forecast issue. Since 1988, Richard has tracked aircraft programs, markets, and companies as an analyst and consultant. He manages consulting projects in the commercial and military aviation field and analyzes broader defense and aerospace market and industry trends. Prior to joining Aerodynamic in January 2022, he was vice president of analysis at Teal Group. There, in addition to his consulting role, he wrote and edited Teal Group's World Military and Civil Aircraft Briefing, a forecasting and analysis tool covering more than 135 aircraft programs and markets. He's advised numerous aerospace companies, including most prime and many second and third tier contractors in the US, Europe, and Asia. He also advises numerous financial institutions on aerospace market conditions. Frequently cited as an aviation industry authority by trade and news publications, Richard has appeared on numerous television, news, and radio programs, including ABC, BBC, Bloomberg, Reuters, CBS, CNN, NBC, NPR, and PBS. Before we begin, we'd like to thank our Manufacturing Group webinar series sponsors. Amphenol CIT, formerly known as Carlisle Interconnect Technologies, is a global leader in designing and manufacturing high-performance wire and cable, including optical fiber. With over 80 years of experience, the company offers a comprehensive product portfolio featuring specialty and filtered connectors, contacts, integrated systems, cable assemblies, complex harnesses, racks, avionics trays, and installation kits. Now part of Amphenol, the company is more committed than ever to excellence, providing top-tier, lightweight, and durable products for the harshest environments. Additionally, they offer engineering and certification services for commercial aerospace, military, industrial, test and measurement, and space industries. Visit www.amphenol-cit.com for more information. For over 50 years, industrial metrology has been at the core of Renishaw's business. Renishaw technology can be applied throughout the manufacturing process of a complex aerospace part. They offer solutions to help aerospace manufacturers perform repeatable, traceable, and efficient work to the finest tolerances so that every component meets its design intent. Discover more at www.renishaw.com/aerospace. We'd also like to thank this webinar's sponsors, Fager Automation, has experience in the development and manufacturing of products for machine automation and control. They offer solutions tailored to the needs of customers, from developing software to the versatility of their production process. Historically, Fager Automation is focused on the machine tool sector, where they are one of the world leaders with a broad technical and sales network spread out in more than 50 countries through branch offices and distributors. iBase-T is the global leader in cloud software for the aerospace and defense industry. Committed to innovation, customer success, and product excellence, iBase-T ensures digital continuity across global manufacturing, quality and maintenance, repair and overhaul operations. iBase-T's Solumina manufacturing operations platform is a cloud-native solution that establishes a digital ecosystem to drive innovation and improve operational performance for the most critically complex manufacturers. Some of iBase-T's customers include Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Rolls-Royce, Pratt & Whitney, GE, and Textron. Founded in 1913, Martindale produces circular saw blades for numerous applications, ranging from slotting to slitting to profiling to cutting off parts. With the addition of Gailey Saws in 2017, it continued to assume its role as a premier manufacturer of solid carbide, carbide tip, and high-speed steel saws and cutters. combining a wide variety of sawtooth geometries, pitch, side clearance, tooth count, coupled with various blade saw raw materials and special coatings. Martindale-Gailey can provide the optimum blades to address difficult application requirements, including a range of saws, knives, and finishing blades to successfully cut and trim composite and honeycomb composite materials. Emphasis has always been on customer service, highest quality with tight tolerance workmanship, and application support for its products. Nagata Engineering, founded in 1895, is the oldest existing horizontal-focused machine tool builder in Japan. Known for their significant performance advancements, Nagata's high-rigidity boxway 5-axis trunnion series solutions for complex aerospace and defense applications are equipped with a one-piece casting trunnion table. Both ends of the table are supported by robust roller bearings and worm wheel drives. This mechanical structure emphasizes stable machining accuracy throughout the working flow. High horsepower and torque allow you to take full advantage of the rigid machine frame. For hard metals, high torque, heavy-duty spindles are available with up to 1,438 foot-pounds of torque. Solar Atmospheres provides commercial vacuum heat treating and brazing services in markets including aerospace and defense, with more than 60 vacuum furnaces from lab size to 48 feet long with 150,000-pound capacity. Solar Atmospheres can handle any size job. It operates from plants in eastern and western Pennsylvania, California, Michigan, and South Carolina, all ISO 9001, 2015, and AS 9100D, and NADCAP registered for heat treating. Third Wave Systems brings insights using proprietary material and process modeling capabilities to track material state throughout the product lifecycle for customers in automotive, aerospace, medical, power generation, and cutting tools. The state of aerospace now. Much of it is where it was in April. Air travel demand in the U.S. is back to pre-COVID-19 levels. Internationally, air travel demand is closing in on pre-pandemic levels. The International Air Transport Association and Airports Council International project global passenger traffic will reach 9.5 billion, which is 104% of the 2019 level. The airline industry is expected to generate nearly $1 trillion in revenue this year, which is 158 billion more than in 2019. It's great times. Airbus expects to deliver 770 planes this year, although the target's reduced from 800, but up compared to 735 delivered in 2023. Boeing has delivered only 291 jetliners through the third quarter, Airbus 497 deliveries so far this year, with below hoped-for production rates. Embraer recorded a 33% year-on-year increase in deliveries for the third quarter and reached a record $22.7 billion backlog. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAM, Union District 75, the strike against Boeing continues. It's now in day 43. However, union members are voting today on the latest contract proposal from Boeing. The Western voting locations just opened minutes ago as we record this webinar. Meanwhile, there's still war in the Eastern Europe, Middle East, and tensions in the Asia-Pacific region continue. In the U.S., inflation is flattening mostly, and many financial experts say the U.S. economy looks pretty good going into 2025. So we asked Richard once again to explain what our members of the aerospace supply chain need to know to prepare for what's ahead. Richard, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thanks to you and Aerospace Manufacturing Design, and of course our sponsors for organizing this webinar. It's my privilege to be back here again today talking about, well, the seeming chaos in our industry that we are still slouching through. This was the theme earlier in the year. It's still the theme now. And you look at the quarterly results that you just referenced there, Eric, boy, they sure reflect that. Everybody, even very well-run companies like General Electric, are reporting a very difficult situation on the production front. Gulfstream General Dynamics just reported, and 4 G700s. That's their flagship new version of the G650 series, and it's they were supposed to do 50 this year. Clearly, a 4 in the third quarter. That's just not happening. Similarly, Lockheed Martin just reported, and it looks like we're going to get, the 100 F-35s this year out of 156 we had hoped for, but at least they provided guidance for catching up with the next 3 years. And most of all, of course, Boeing. So much to discuss. there'll be opportunities in this presentation to talk about the individual companies and programs involved. But again, the unifying theme in all of this is companies simply can't produce what they want and what has been promised. And as a consequence, we continue to have an industry that is production constrained and not demand constrained. So after 36 years as a market analyst, I'm kind of out of a job here. Markets are fine. I can't think of any exceptions to that. This has really become a game of production. Now, for today's presentation, I'm going to focus slightly more on in part because I'm here at the National Business Aircraft Association show in Las Vegas. I'll be talking a bit about business aircraft, also focus more on the military side. Jetliners, of course, I've always emphasized, but a little bit less today, in part because, well, we kind of know what's going on there. Not that it's pretty, but we know what's going on. But let's start with them, please. Next page. First of all, the big dashboard of where things are in the jetliner business. There are 4 buckets to look at, 4 buckets to keep you up at night, if you will. There's we've got both the current rating and the previous quarter rating. Macroeconomics first, pretty good. Globally, there are a few clouds here and there. Mideast. But other than that, the U.S. economy is in really good shape. Europe is not bad, not as good as the US, but not bad. China is a major problem. China is probably the biggest area other than the Middle East with clouds. And the sort of new fallback number for them is 5% year-over-year growth, and they are not getting there. China is an area of borderline crisis. Next bucket is actually looking considerably stronger. We'd been worried the previous quarter about an air travel demand slowdown. It's actually pretty positive now. It's healthily into green territory. Really good. As Eric said a moment ago, we're back to 2019 levels. More importantly, business travel looks like it's come back. There were a lot of people concerned that perhaps what we're doing now would take the place of an awful lot of business meetings, and there's been some of that, but it looks like there's absolutely no impact. Good communications are good communications, right? It doesn't mean that people were communicating more over Zoom or Teams or what have you, rather than seeing each other. So business travel is very much back. Also, good news, aircraft demand. Again, an improvement from gray to black. Very, very, very positive numbers. Book to bill this year won't be as great as it was last year, because what's the point of ordering jets? You can't get them anyway. But you'll see in a moment, backlogs are incredible. So demand is very strong. People want their jets. Which brings us to the unpleasant 4th bucket, supply. And that too has seen a change. And unlike the other 3 buckets, it's not a positive change. Gray to black, even more in the red. A lot of that is Boeing strike. You can't get jets. Now, if you're in the business of the aftermarket, repairing older jets that have been sticking around for yet another D check unexpectedly, well, that's good news for you. If you are a lessor or financier and you own jets, that's good news for you. Anything that keeps supply from growing is good for people who have supply. But if you're in the business of building jets, or more likely parts for jets, or machine tools for people who build jets or parts for jets, it's as close to, that's as deep into red territory as I've ever seen in 36 years. That's really bad. Obviously, if we had this conversation 24 hours, the picture could look better or worse. I honestly cannot tell you which way I think the strike vote will go at Boeing. There's certainly plenty of workers there who lived through the 2014 events, and they want their pension back. What you've got today is kind of a referendum on, hey, is this percentage increase in salary good, and it is close to what they want, or are you going to hold out for a structured pension like they used to have until 2014? I really can't tell you the answer to that. It's going to be fascinating to watch, just like so many other elections that are kind of almost effectively a coin toss at this point. I really can't tell you. Either way, supply, red, 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 warning, danger. Next page, please. Traffic, again, pretty darn good. And we've got a bit of a impairment relative to where we would have been if the pandemic hadn't happened, but things are pretty good right now. Our last full up forecast going region by region by region, July 24, hasn't changed a whole heck of a lot. A somewhat muted summer peak, but right now we're back to normal growth, which accounts for our improved arrow in the previous collection of buckets. There's a bit of a concern about fares and profitability, but nothing that would cause me to panic, nothing that would put that in the red. And frankly, airlines had been doing great with fares, as we all know, right? I mean, want to take your family to Europe? Wow, that's a lot of money. North Atlantic fares in particular. So a little bit of softening, perhaps inevitable, and from the standpoint of humble consumers like us, maybe desirable. Not a bad situation. Next page, please. So just to summarize where we are on the jetliner front, things continue to come back in a K-shaped recovery with single aisle jetliners, that blue line, roaring back. Well, you're going to see a bit of a hook there in 24. 24 is not looking good, partly because of the strike, partly because of even production disappointments at Airbus, which also are rooted in disappointing production numbers from the engine guys. You're hearing that all come out in the quarterly numbers right now. Again, Larry Culp at GE saying this is going to take a few more years. But still, we're anticipating a very strong ride up. Wide body is a lot more muted. It's the green line. Regionals never really went anywhere, never any good, never really going anywhere. But again, the big change here being this split between robust single aisle demand and relatively sluggish twin aisle demands as people continue to use single aisles whenever they can in preference to twin aisles. Next page, please. Backlogs, oh boy, please build jets. Airbus nicely ahead because of the A321. That is that divergence between Airbus and Boeing. Just truly fantastic numbers out of the A321neo. Boeing, you can see there behind, a little stronger in the wide body front, as you can see by the light blue. The only numbers here I would not take seriously at all, Comac, is just because Comac shows up here. Well, we have to put them in because they're claiming this backlog. They're delivering an occasional plane. And frankly, their planes don't look terribly good, and they still have a major problem with product support. They have a major problem with aircraft performance and also just learning how to build planes. Do I take them seriously? I will take them very seriously. If they privatize, they're no longer a tool of the Chinese government. And if they establish a global product support structure, which is frankly just as hard as building a jet, then I'll take them seriously. Till then, you can just regard that 1493 Comac number as just kind of there for formality. Embraer, though, take very seriously, and they're doing pretty good on the production side. A couple of days ago, Embraer announced that they were indeed, sort of a long rumor that we've been hearing for some time, considering getting into Airbus and Boeing territory. That's a fascinating topic of discussion because everyone loves Embraer. They're a really good company. And Boeing, of course, is stumbling very badly. And it would be terrific if this duopoly became a triopoly. But bear in mind that when Bombardier launched a new, larger jetliner, it almost broke them. And they were a $20 billion company at the time. Embraer is a $5 billion company. They're going to need awfully big, deep-pocketed partners if they can do this at all. So in other words, it's less about what they say they're going to do and more about what an industrial partner or financier or a collection of folks do for them, using Embraer effectively as a storefront company. But if that happens, I think the industry would applaud, and I think Embraer would do great. It's just the question of people showing up with literally tens of billions of dollars in cash to make it happen. Next page, please. Now, one thing to remember is whenever a new jet happens, it's going to be new. It's going to be genuinely new because we're kind of running out of runway with the traditional potted engine, tube and wing thing. Will it be a second generation geared turbofan or open fans like the CFM Rise program? Will it be a blended wing body? Will it be a truss braced wing or a very high aspect ratio wing? We don't know, but it's going to probably have some new architecture. Now, the good or bad news, depending upon your perspective, is that means that this new plane isn't arriving this decade. It might be launched this decade, but it's not arriving till realistically mid 2030s, which gives everybody a solid 10 or 15 years of solid, hopefully high volume, depending upon supply chains, production for current gen products. But in terms of, just elaborating on current design, it's probably going to have to wait till new concepts are available. People ask me all the time what I think about Jet Zero. I really, really like Jet Zero. They're fascinating to me. It sounds like they've got some really interesting intellectual property, but they're a small startup with a couple $100 million. Again, they're going to need big, big partners, even bigger than Embraer would have. Hey, maybe there's an alliance, Jet Zero working with Embraer, working with, I don't know, the biggest bank there is, coupled with a couple of US defense primes or mezzanine contractors like GE or RTX. I don't know, but it would take a village. It would take a big village. Still, very promising concept. Next page, please. Now that's it for jets. Let's turn to the topic that's being discussed literally across from my hotel room here in Vegas, the business aircraft market. You can see the transformation that took place in the business jet industry over the past few decades. Basically, in the start of my career, it was a bit of a backwater. There were about 6 or 7 billion per year new deliveries. Then you had a couple of major transformations that brought it to the 20 something or even as high as the 30 something billion range. And we've been kind of on a plateau ever since. But either way, it's sort of interesting. You compare this with jetliners. Jetliners peaked out just back before everything, the pandemic, at about 110, 120 billion. We're heading back to that. Business jets, which don't take more than 0.1% of the people on the big jetliners, are 20 to 25. So it's still significant. Next page, please. However, one thing that took place in the business jet industry is this weird bifurcation. Basically, in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, the market split apart with big cabin stuff, your Gulfstreams, your Dassaults, your Bombardiers, doing reasonably well. And then the stuff at the bottom from Cessna and Embraer, and spare a thought for Hawker Beechcraft, which went bankrupt and was absorbed into Textron, that collapsed. Hasn't really recovered, not to any great extent. So we continue to see this split with big cabin stuff doing pretty well, small cabin stuff not so well. It's very interesting. The mood at the show, I guess you could say, has been termed skittish. You've got supply chain problems that bedevil this part of the industry just as much as you have supply chain problems that bedevil the jetliner business. You've got a lot of, I guess, geopolitical uncertainty. For example, the China market came and went, and then it went away largely because of uncertainty about how the Chinese government addresses this market, and ditto for a lot of Asia. You've got a very strong North America market, but right now people are sort of waiting and watching to see what tax policies will change in the aftermath of the election and whatever else. And Europe, of course, there continues to be a bit of uncertainty there. So it's a skittish mood, but overall the backlogs are pretty strong. What's interesting is that nobody's really talking about growing production to any great extent. Partly that's because of supply chain constraints, but also a lot of it is due to the OEMs emphasizing profit. They're saying, hey, we would rather raise prices and therefore profits rather than increase production. They're showing a lot of what you might call self-interested discipline, or course, part of it might be, again, inflicted by supply chain constraints, but in general, they're keeping a lid on production volume. Next page, please. One thing that's really interesting that we're seeing in the business jet industry, and again, a topic of conversation here in Las Vegas, is that a lot of the emphasis in terms of markets is going towards aircraft management. You compare pre-pandemic with post-pandemic management, branded charter, and fractional operations. Look particularly at fractional operations, 62%. The only loser, corporate flight departments that are down 9%. Now, what does that mean? It's, so many other aspects of the pandemic were kind of a great accelerator, from, the death of movie theaters to the rise of, online retailing to whatever else. And this is no exception. These trends were underway before, but they were accelerated by the pandemic. And a lot of it is due to a desire for anonymity. If you're someone famous, you don't want to be tracked on FlightAware. You'd rather just fly with a management charter or fractional company. Part of it is because the people who joined the market over the past few years as a consequence of the pandemic, they're not willing to commit to owning a jet and having their own flight department. They'd rather just buy time or buy hours, whatever, on someone else's jet or on something owned by a fractional operation. And so as a consequence, that's where you're seeing the growth. And it's kind of interesting, as a consequence of this major secular change, utilization is up considerably, because your typical flight department jet is operated, 300 hours a year, maybe, whereas a fractional, a charter, a management jet could be 800 or 900. So in terms of hourly utilization, that's up even more than, the shift would imply. That's kind of interesting. And that's also good. Again, maintenance. The one big winner in this industry right now, MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul. And that's true because jetliners aren't available because of these production constraints. And that's true also in the business jet front, because of the shift away from flight departments and towards management charter and fractional. Next page, please. Turning now to the defense side of things, defense looking very strong. We continue to see very robust numbers. This is the market for all countries except for people that aren't addressable, which means, of course, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and one or two others. Everybody else is growing at a pretty good CAGR. The US already had its big increase. I should also mention that we've adjusted these for inflation. So, a lot of the debate right now is in the US is over, a relatively flat top line. Truth is that both sides are talking about this being a flat top line, which kind of means a slight shrinkage in real terms due to inflation, down 1% here and there. Next page, please. Now, aircraft. This year, we've sort of merged all aircraft categories together, but you can see some very strong growth. The military aircraft market had been about 40 billion, still stumbling with supply chain difficulties, but it's growing by about 70% there. All the various categories. Fighter, of course, the biggest single share. Rotorcraft, military lifters, trainers, multi-mission maritime, Sequad ISR, purpose-built, AWACS, whatever. Tankers, and then bombers. The B-21 bomber in particular, of course, being very strong growth. So it's an extremely strong market, again, somewhat laid low by production constraints. Everyone reporting this week has absolutely nothing good to report, I'm afraid, in terms of getting past the supply chain constraints that have been bedeviling deliveries in this segment. Next page, please. One interesting aspect of the military business we've been looking at for some time is the rise of the very high-end combat aircraft market customer. It's interesting. You go back to the 1960s, there was exactly one customer for very high-end, very expensive jets, basically jets with a unit price of more than $90 million unit recurring flyaway. And then for 30 years, only 3 countries joined Saudi Arabia: Australia, Israel, and Japan. In the 2000s, they were joined by Singapore and South Korea. They both ordered F-15, so they joined the club. In the 2010s, a whole bunch of new countries joined that club, that elite export market club. Look what's happened over the past couple of years to that list. And basically, you've got countries looking nervously at both Russia and China and saying, we want the combat effectiveness and the strategic relationship with the producer country that comes with a high-end jet. So I like to cite the example here of one country that has the population of Baltimore and is the only country in the world that has not just one high-end $100 million jet, but 3 different high-end $100 million jets. It is Qatar, of all places. Population of Baltimore, and they've got F-15s, Rafales, and Eurofighter Typhoons. And they would love to get a 4th kind in the form of the F-35, but they can't get that. So it's really interesting. The high-end market fighter club continues to grow. The implications for producers, pretty significant. The lesson is build something better, more capable, more expensive, and they will come. It's really just that simple. Next page, please. Now, in terms of new programs, what's going on? Not a lot of changes since our last update, except for a very big one. The B-21 is doing great, but NGAD is stumbling badly. Next generation air dominance. There are a number of reasons for that. So many. I've written a lot about this. A lot of people have. The biggest problem for the Air Force right now is that the land-based strategic nuclear triad member, the Sentinel, GBSD, ground-based strategic deterrent, basically the new ICBM, the new Minuteman replacement, has become a monster cash suck. So the idea of funding NGAD right now is quite possibly a non-starter, unfortunately. The way to think about the ICBM is that it may or may not be strategically relevant, but it's being built to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars in states that have exactly 2 senators and nothing else to really prioritize, basically Wyoming, North Dakota, and a couple of others. So the Air Force has no choice but to keep plowing cash into that. I think they'd prefer to fund other programs, but they can't. The other problem is that Northrop Grumman backed out of NGAD, leaving Lockheed Martin versus Boeing. So if you're the Air Force, who do you give this contract to? Do you give it to Boeing, which is still trying to decide whether rocks are edible or something? Or do you give the entire monopoly for both 5th and 6th generation fighters, F-22, F-35, NGAD, to Lockheed Martin, which is technically a very good company, but would have absolutely zero reason to control costs on it? So, I think for the Air Force's standpoint, it's understandable that NGAD keeps slipping to the right and will probably continue to slip to the right. The FARA program, everyone could see that cancellation coming, and it was canceled. Everything else is in really good shape, and we're expecting the Navy to decide on an FAXX, a replacement for the Super Hornet, sometime in the next year or two. Next page, please. You cannot build these things fast enough. Various missiles and munitions. You want to look for a growth market in aerospace? Look at these guys. Starting at the bottom, air to air, then air to surface, then air defense, then anti-tank, then anti-ship, surface to surface, smart munitions of all sorts, collaborative combat aircraft, drones that cooperate with fighters, and then UAVs. Basically, a few years ago, doing my job, and this was a collection of stuff I didn't pay attention to because it was about 15 or 16 billion a year in today's money, and it is ramping up to more than 3 times that. That, of course, is a reflection of a world that's in chaos. And again, here's another market that if they could resolve supply chain difficulties, boy, you'd see like a 60-degree angle here, or in whatever it would be, maybe an 80-degree angle. It would just be straight up. Next page, please. Now, you've seen this before. I like concluding on this slide, although I've got one more beyond this, I believe. this is an incredibly concentrated market and industry. I follow 130 programs, or rather my colleagues and I do. I'd like to think we like them all, but really the top 20 matter most, and really it's the top 5 in terms of industrial output and therefore desire for machine tools and capital equipment of all flavors. 5 of them are 55% of the total industry in terms of output. And oh, by the way, that A320neo thing, I mean, another example of something you can't build fast enough because of the A321neo, that kind of cashade over everything else. But other than that, demand for capital equipment, machine tools, 320neo, 737 MAX, hopefully to be restarted soon, depending upon today's strike vote, a necessary precondition for getting back on track. And just to remind you, they've been stuck in second gear building 20-something per month ever since MAX production resumed around the time of the pandemic. And they want to get to 50-something within a few years. We'll see. But anyway, that is the big variable there. 787, F-35, and A350XWB. These are the real needle movers in the industry. Everything else, I love following them, but in terms of volume, as you can see, they're kind of in the shade. And once you get out of the top 20, there's only 23% left in terms of industrial volume. So this gives you an idea of where your priority should be. And as I'm fond of saying, everyone loves talking about these eVTOLs that proliferate all over the place. They're not coming to the chart anytime soon. So careful how much you put into that in terms of business development resources. It's just not that crucial. And frankly, I think there'll be a day of reckoning in terms of mass bankruptcies, because there are hundreds of people who want in on a market that's pretty damn small. Think of it as a little bit of, mass insanity on some level. There'll be some people who survive and maybe after bankruptcy have viable businesses, but it's going to be pretty ugly in my view. Next page, please. Just to conclude on my favorite point, what's different this time? We went back in time, and I think you might have seen this if you were here for the previous quarterly or biannual update. Typically, a market recovery, and there's the past 3 market recoveries compared with today's market recovery in the red line. Typically, what happens is we overbuild, we overcorrect. We have the seeds of our own bust cycle built into the boom cycle. Basically, we create overcapacity. That is not happening this time. Not because we're super good at discipline, but because, frankly, production delays aren't letting us build what I think people would like to build. And as a consequence, the sort of second order effect that I think is actually kind of a positive, we're going to have a better and more sustainable and more stable recovery. I think it's a really good decade that we're in here. I don't see, aside from a terrible exogenous shock, what would precipitate a downturn, for the simple reason that people are a long way from getting what they want. And again, from the standpoint of me being here in Las Vegas, classic example. Normally, people would say, if you're at Gulfstream or Bombardier, you'd say, oh, you want business jets? Let's make hay while the sun shines. Get them out the door. And give everyone what they want. And when times are good, and then a couple of years later, well, everyone had what they wanted. That's not good. Things either plateau, or as you can see in the the mid 2000s, they fall. I don't think we're going to suffer that fate this time, for the simple reason that people can't get everything they want. So my positive conclusion here is we've got a better, more stable outlook ahead than we had in previous recoveries. Thanks for your time, and I'll turn back over to Eric, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Richard, for giving us some better ideas on what to expect for aerospace markets now and in 2025. As usual, there's a lot to digest. As I pointed out earlier, Kelly Ortberg, the Boeing president and CEO, reported third quarter results this morning. What is the feeling that you have of his ability to restore Boeing? I mean, they talk about a huge backlog of $500 billion. but they also have revenue. They're going to streamline. He said there will be relentless in changing the Boeing culture through action, not just words on a page. He's even opened up the possibility of a new airplane. So,
he's saying all the right things. I mean, everything you just said, changing the culture. If you look at the statement on Boeing, he gave on, you can find it on Boeing's website. It was exactly what I would say, show up on the shop floor, visit, talk with the people engaged in the company's core business of designing and building aircraft, something previous management had really zero interest. They regarded the business as something that they dragged around on the back of their shoes after they left the executive washroom. Ortberg is completely different. However, big if, I mean, I don't understand why the strike hasn't been resolved. I mean, I don't understand the second contract offer, frankly. It was delivered in a very strange way where it was like, well, we're not even going to socialize it with union management. We're just going to go directly to the media and to workers. And it's not the right way to do it. And they called it a best and final, which it clearly wasn't, because there's a new best and final. Everything about it just doesn't seem terribly well done. So, one possibility is that Ortberg is still feeling his way along and dealing with a lot of institutional resistance. And that's a possibility, or possibly, he's a little bit ahead of his skis. I guess we're going to find out. But the statement, getting back to your point, the statement today was very positive, and I liked reading all of it.
all right. So Airbus sounds like they've kind of got the catbird seat now, that they're have huge numbers of planes that will take years to complete the backlog, and yet they're shrinking their space division and things like that. Are there any concerns that with both of these companies trimming their workforces, that will actually slow things, or will that make things better?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned. I mean, on the Airbus front, defense and space, 2,500 jobs. That's not a big needle mover in terms of resources. And frankly, there are a couple of really weak Airbus programs, most notably the A400M military airlifter, but also some of their helicopter programs. So that looks extremely selective and targeted. Boeing, by contrast, is the literal definition of decimation, 17,000 out of 170,000. My Latin's a little rusty, but yeah, that's decimation. I don't get that, right? I mean, where's that coming from? You need labor, production resources to make that jetliner ramp. So it's not coming from there. They'd been pretty consistent in saying that a lot of their underperforming defense programs needed more talent, not less. Overhead, does anyone believe that Boeing has gobs of overhead you can find 17,000 jobs in? I just don't get that at all. So yes, I am concerned.
All right. So back to Boeing, the 777-9 is delayed a year. They're going to end the 767 freighter production, but continue with the KC-46. Are these decisions going to hurt or help the company, or do they have any choice?
Yeah. Each of these is taking turn. 777X, I think it's kind of a foregone conclusion. Resource constraints, the strike doesn't help. This is the longest delayed program possibly ever. Embarrassing, but kind of inevitable, I guess. The KC-46, I'm a little confused by, because they'd been messaging and working very hard on getting an environmental regulation exemption that would allow them to produce the type after 2027. And they're going to keep producing the tanker version, KC-46, as you say. I guess they must, I mean, it's really just, one or two customers, FedEx, UPS. So maybe they got a signal from those guys, yeah, we're done, thank you. Or maybe it's a decision to streamline things that I'm not really sure I understand. I'd like to get more clarity on that, frankly.
Okay. Can you expand on where the production constraints are right now?
Yeah.
Someone here talks about calling on a job shop. Many aren't getting contracts. Is that pipeline stopped, or everybody is on hold?
Well, right now, Boeing is very much on hold. I guess after the rejection of the first offer, they just issued a stop ordering order. So that's devastating. Airbus, of course, Airbus is slowing also. Why? Because of course, how many parts does it take to build a jet? Well, all of them. So, if there's an area of concern, you got to slow down on all of it. You don't want to be left with inventory. And supply chain management is all about making inventory management somebody else's problem. Somebody, down in the supply chain. That hurts. Neither Airbus nor Boeing have covered themselves in glory in terms of protecting and caring for the supply chain. That's very concerning. Where is the limfac, as they say in the Pentagon? What are the limiting factors? The one reliable castings and forgings, particularly on the engine front. That's just absolutely a given. Titanium, nickel, what have you, castings and forgings. But, some of our supply chain people at Aerodynamic liken it to a game of whack-a-mole. If it weren't for that, it would be interiors. For a while, we had coatings. For a while, we had ball bearings. I mean, it's always some limfac. And as a consequence, everyone else feels that pain because they've got to manage inventories. Anyway, not a happy picture.
All right. Is there any advice you can give to members of the supply chain? Keep your powder dry or invest now? I know it's a tough call, but you
I've
can't
been
just
saying
wait for everything.
Right. No, I know that. Same thing I've been saying for years. Keep your portfolios as balanced as possible with the greatest exposure to defense that you can manage. Um, obviously it's a little late for that advice now, but it's, I think it's been a point for years. It's kind of horrible looking at Spirit Aerosystems because I think, past management gets a lot of blame, but they were doing kind of the right thing. They were trying to make themselves a well-balanced portfolio center of excellence and doing everything they could. Maybe they expanded too fast, I don't know, but they were following the advice of, people who knew stuff. um, and it's just really tough. Um, Obviously, talent pipelines seem to be a crucial factor. One thing that was constantly discussed at Farnborough this year was it's not just the supply chain folks who now are a strategic function, it's also HR, making sure that, it's not just, keeping your powder dry and available to make those investments, having the working capital needed to make the production ramp when it happens. It's also having access to talent, whether it's through local schools or maybe government training initiatives or whatever else. But prioritize your people. That seems to be the one crucial, you know, I guess, qualities of well-run companies in the supply chain that I've noted, just this emphasis on mentoring, this emphasis on talent pipelines and whatever else.
So it seems like we could get some of these blockages out of the way, we could get to ramp up those production rates that everyone's so desirable of. So Lockheed Martin reported their sales were up substantially for the third quarter. RTX and its different divisions, Pratt and Whitney and Collins, are also up double digits compared to the previous year. Collins was up 7%. Northrop Grumman's coming out with their results tomorrow. So how is that? Is there a place for a relief valve? I mean, if commercial is a drag on the market right now, is there an opportunity to get involved in some of these programs, or are they pretty well set? If you're not there, you're just going to have to wait.
Well, I've always said defense is the best place you could put your BD efforts, just because the Pentagon is mindful of supply chain health, and they do, they pay not in 120 days, not in 90 days, but, a lot less than that. And they insist that some of the primes do a decent job in passing that cash through. So the answer is absolutely. Are there programs you could get in on? Well, obviously things like B-21 or V-280, there's still stuff flowing through the pipeline in one way or another. And there's, I I guess more coming, especially in the black world, and collaborative combat aircraft. I think it's probably worth talking to the new players. The one theme of the two big trade shows in Washington, Air Force Association and Association of the U.S. Army, was these new players, the Andurils, the Kratoses, the Palantirs, folks like that. General Atomics has been a new player for some time, but I'll throw them in that group too. And it seems like the Pentagon is willing to give them a shot. So it looks like there will be work flowing through them as well.
Okay. Honeywell says business aircraft purchase plans indicate demand for new aircraft is normalizing at an elevated level, significantly above pre-pandemic figures. Do you see anything that could stand in that way? I know there's some talk of people being shamed out of flying business jets, but again, you pointed out one of the remedies for that is fractional shares, where you're not the airplane owner, you're just a user, almost like an Uber or Lyft.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, right? Anonymity is sort of the way out of flight shaming. And I'm not so sure how big a factor that was in the market. I mean, maybe in Northern Europe, certainly not a whole lot of other places. I mean, you know, you look at business jet participation rates relative to GDP, it's followed a fairly consistent pattern over the years. It's not like there are certain markets that are suddenly shutting down because of some cultural aspects. Now, again, people are going down the prophylactic path of, going through branded management or charter or what have you to maintain anonymity. But I don't think you're going to see any major impact. For me, it's just the implications for the business of this switch away from direct ownership and flight departments to shared use. And there's some positives, but also some negatives. It could be that, the customized interior folks feel a bit of heat. But again, the folks who do maintenance, repair, and overhaul probably get some benefit. That includes Honeywell, of course.
All right. So with the pressure on the supply chain, are there still opportunities for companies to get in the aerospace, maybe that are active in automotive or medical parts, or should they wait?
I'd like to
Or
think so,
space?
right? I mean, I like new participants in the industry. And if there's a problem in the industry, it's not lack of demand. It's frankly weakness at some of the third tier companies that understandably have had a problem accessing capital to make the production ramp and people. But if you're someone in the, I don't know, whatever, in any of these spaces, and you have access to capital at reasonable rates, you have access to talent. Please, we need you. Join. That'd be great. I think there are lots of opportunities. It's frankly really good to see, because we did go through this period in the 90s towards the earlier part of my career where people were leaving. They didn't like the paperwork. They didn't like the way they were treated. I think maybe there's a better opportunity now than there's been in decades.
All right. Any thoughts on the boom supersonic overture?
I really don't like that program. I'm sorry. I really don't like that program. They're good at raising money. I don't understand the market. I don't understand how they could be talking about a new supersonic jet without talking about a new engine, aside from some companies that have never done anything of the sort. They're kind of implying that, you can build a new large supersonic engine in your basement or something. I really don't get that program, but people are giving them money. So frankly, for as long as people do that, they'll be around. But to be blunt, you might say their name advertises their fate.
Mm. Right. You talked about the loyal, what has been called the loyal wingman, the CCAs and all of that. Is that really going to be, is the sixth generation fighter really the last manned fighter? Or will it be an unmanned or uncrewed system?
Yeah, I actually think the CCA or loyal wingman, if you prefer, you could use them interchangeably, really, is actually has the potential to revitalize the crewed fighter, because until artificial intelligence takes over, if ever that happens or whatever, you need that, central control unit with a person inside. The only thing we're really talking about is the ratio between CCAs and crewed fighters. Is it 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, or is it 6-to-1? And even there, it's going to be really slow. When Lockheed Martin reported earnings a day ago, Jim Takelet, the CEO, made the very interesting very interesting comment that he thought increment 1 CCAs, which is the most recent contract that was awarded, they're not going to be for combat at all. Those are just for proof of concept. Can you fly with the bigger machine? That kind of thing. Increment 2, possibly for combat, but that's way into the next decade. So, and that's even before we talk about getting rid of crewed planes. So I think there's at least another generation, perhaps several generations of crewed planes. You might need fewer of them as CCAs do more of the work, but again, that depends upon AI and other factors.
Okay. So unmanned or uncrewed aerial vehicles have shown to be very disruptive in Eastern Europe. And you show that on your chart as a growth industry. Are there any players that are particularly seated to take advantage of that? Because they range from very small to much more complex.
Yeah, what's really interesting is that you're really not seeing in that chart the kind of growth that's out there, but that's because the growth that's out there is in people's workshops and laboratories. The number one lesson of the Ukraine war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is large numbers of very small things work, at least in situations like that. And those drones, they don't show up in the charts. They the very biggest is the Bayraktar from Turkey, which is sort of a, I don't know, mini Reaper or mini Predator or what have you. But most are things that cost, like the Shahid from Iran, they cost 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, something like that. Having said that, I'm always really quick to point out that might not have relevance in the Pacific because these things have range in the 10s or 20s of miles. The Pacific is a very different beast. But you've got this split basically between the people who've traditionally done drones, your General Atomics, and obviously Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, whoever else does drones. A few new players, again, whatever Anduril or Palantir or whatever else want to introduce into the market. And then people you frankly never heard of, just building Radio Shack type stuff.
Are we going to see the open rotor become the dominant engine in the single aisle market?
We just might. I mean, I'm kind of intrigued by Rise, and there are a number of uncertainties about customer acceptance. I was around for Open Rotor 1.0 back in the late 80s. I was a jet engine analyst back then, and you had the Allison Pratt 578DX and the original GE, which was the GE 36, and there were all kinds of stumbling blocks. But if fuel prices stay high, which they possibly will, relatively high, not ridiculously high, and if certification, customer acceptance, and whatever else isn't a problem, then I guess the real challenge becomes the divergence between open rotor and ducted and geared. We don't know what that divergence is, right? If it's 1 or 2%, it could be that ducted and geared, not just as good, in some ways better from a certification standpoint. But if it's a 7, 8, 9, 12%, whatever difference, then yeah, it becomes dominant. But we won't know that till tests really begin in 3 or 4 years down the road.
Do you see the newer technologies coming online, and some of the older ones, automation, but especially artificial intelligence? Do those offer a way out of some of the backlogs and constraints that we're experiencing now?
There's a lot I don't know about that, but frankly, there's a lot I do know. And it's a little bit oversold. I mean, I look at Boeing's misadventures with the T-7 supersonic trainer to replace the T-38. They put so much emphasis on model-based simulation engineering, and everything like that. Boy, does that look oversold right now. I mean, it would probably be worse without it. I can't say, oh, that was useless. But on the other hand, they just declared another $900 million loss on that program because of, well, shall we say, unmet expectations. So I think you can place, even though technology is useful, necessary, important in all stages, you can maybe put a bit too much emphasis into it.
All right. Well, Richard, we're out of time. So thank you again for your presentation and your responses. Thanks again to our manufacturing group webinar series sponsors, Amphenol CIT and Renishaw. And this webinar sponsors Fager Automation, iBase-T, Martindale, Nagata, Solar Atmospheres, and Third Wave Systems. Be sure to register for our upcoming free webinars at the events menu tab of our websites. If you have any comments or suggestions, please email them to me at ebrothers@GIE.net. On behalf of Aerospace Manufacturing and Design, I wish you a good day and goodbye for now, and have fun at NBAA. Richard,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
You can listen to all of our episodes of Manufacturing Matters and Lunch and Learn podcast from the MFG Radio Network on Spotify, Apple Music, and on our websites, todaysmedicaldevelopments.com, aerospacemanufacturinganddesign.com, defenseandmunitions.com, and evdesignandmanufacturing.com.